People can hear me. Okay, good evening, everyone. Oh, wait. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to this roundtable discussion on 21 Highland Street, the South Union School. I think each committee should call their meetings to order. So for SHOPC, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:08 p.m. Historic.
Sorry, I'm muted.
Gonna call.
Just mute your computer and you can just talk. Everyone can hear you.
I think you have to mute yourself.
You have to mute your computer and not put that on.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I'm getting feedback over here. Okay. I'm calling the meeting of the Historical Commission to order at 7:09 p.m. after the echo delay. And we'll note that present are myself, Kevin Miller, Chair, Vice Chair Eddie Bath, Greg Farrington, Dan Blanchard, and remotely Michelle Hokinson.
Okay. And we don't have CPC does not have a quorum. Open Space does not have a quorum. Recreation does not have a quorum. And for SHOPC, we have John Woods, Jesse Stein, Tom Bisico, Doug Nance, Al Hamilton, and Dorian Jasinski present. Okay. The purpose of our meeting tonight is to have an open and honest dialogue with several of the town committees who have an interest in the building at 21 Highland Street. Future meetings will include more groups as we continue the discussions: planning, youth and family services, the ad hoc committee that will be getting created by the selectmen. I did send the Highland Street subcommittee report to all of your chairs. It has information that might be beneficial to you, but it has a little bit of the history of the building and just overall information that you might find beneficial to you as you look at this building going forward. I ask that each of us tonight remember that we are here to work together as a collective unit to chart a course of possible action for the use of this building. And I ask everyone, please be respectful and to wait to speak until you're recognized by your chair so that we don't speak over each other. A little history on the South Union School. It was built in 1915 and it was designed as a classic revival architectural style. It is listed on both the National Register of Historic Places and the Massachusetts Historic Commission's inventory of historic assets. This building also qualifies under the town of Southborough's definition of historic buildings under our zoning bylaws. The assessed value of the South Union School at the time of the subcommittee report was $2,170,900, which includes the building and the 3 acres of land that it's situated on. The building is located in a residential B zoning district, and the size of the building is 10,103 square feet with 6,705 square feet that is actually finished. The building is home to our town's Youth and Family Services Department and our Recreation Department. Okay, Kevin, you are the chair of the Historic Commission, and I would like for you to start the conversation since this building has such historic value.
Okay, then thank you, Dorian. And I first, before I say anything else, I really want to thank Dorian for convening this meeting and organizing it and bringing us all together, and thank everybody here in the various committees for showing up. It's my position, and I know the position of the entire Historical Commission is that this is how town government should function. That there's not enough of it in my mind, and it's good to see you all in person, and good to get together, and good to sit around. And I really look forward to hearing what everybody has to say. And our goal, principally tonight, is to listen. But I do want to just make a couple of points of why the Historical Commission is interested in this building and why it matters to us. And I want, the various boards, committees, commissions involved in this, and everybody in Southborough, not just the folks in Southville, but throughout the town, to know that your historical commission really cares about this building and thinks it's important to have a full-throated conversation about. Part of our commitment to the building stems from the fact that between 2008 and its eventual listing on the National Register in 2011, a great deal of blood, sweat, and tears and time was expended by previous incarnations of the Historical Commission. This is principally the efforts of the late Kate Madison to get this building recognized, to get it listed, to get it cataloged and categorized. And it is a very, very laborious process. I can tell you, both at the local level and at the state level, when the folks from the MHC, the Mass Historical Commission, sort of take over the process and sort of shepherd it then through the sort of national review. And for folks both in the room and maybe online or at home or looking on this meeting later, who are interested in reading the National Register of Historic Places registration form, as well as the state historic documentation on this building, I would refer you to the MACRA state. This is the database run by the State Historical Commission, and anybody can access it if you just direct your browser to MHC-macris.net. M as in Massachusetts, H as in Historical Commission, C dash Macris, MACRIS.net. And if you just put in the town, Southborough, and then you can search by a common name, just South Union, and it'll come right up. And it's a document, the National Register form, oh my goodness, it runs to, I think, some 60 pages. With very good documentation. One small correction I make is that the building was built actually in 1911 and completed in 1912. And so it's even a little older than Dorian had indicated. But so, you know, our people, and, you know, it's only been now in the register for some 12 years. And again, a lot of work was put into getting it there. And I want to clarify because, and I know Al had on I think a select board meeting made this clarification, but it's important to repeat, I think, is that National Register listing does not protect the building one iota, unfortunately. And this was a point actually that we were careful to make to folks in the Southborough Center Historic District, really recognized in the National Register, the entire district. And we explained to folks that, for instance, that doesn't prevent you, alas, from my standpoint, from applying for a demolition permit or painting your house pink or aluminum siding it or doing whatever you want to it. There's no, the matter of restrictions on buildings is always a matter of local historic districts, and Southborough doesn't have it currently. National registration, a National Register listing is really an honorific, and it's designed to, it opens up certainly the potential for grants, tax breaks, and the like, and those are extensive. But on a daily basis, the idea is to call attention to our history, to our historic assets, to give local residents a sense of pride and a sense of awareness of what they have. But it doesn't provide any statutory protection for the building. So I think that's important for people to understand, because I've heard citizens sort of, even in online forums, say, well, there's nothing that's going to happen as South Union because it's on the National Register. Well, sorry. What happens if a building is altered beyond recognition or torn down? It will simply be delisted, and Southborough will be diminished in terms of its prestige and its history. I would note that the South Union building is one of only two National Register listed, individually listed National Register properties in Southborough. The other is the JDC Bradley House, is your private home at 5 Sadie Hut Lane. That's it. So this is the only civic building that we have that's on the National Register. It's certainly a goal of ours going forward. I certainly think that today, the two most obvious ones is that our town library and the townhouse ought to be individually listed. I think they certainly merit it on the National Register. And that's something we would be working for. We did read the SHOPC subcommittee report, and I've said this publicly in other forums before. I want to say it here that I thought it was an excellent report, and I congratulate Mr. Pissacool, Frisch, Stein, and Palmer on the work. I thought it was well written, balanced, fair, and pretty comprehensive. Even though it had some possibilities that alarmed us, on the other side, it was quite fair about the possibilities for preservation. And so I really applauded that report. I applauded again, and I think it was a really good start. I would note that when the National Register review was done just 10 or 12 years ago, it was noted to be in very good overall condition. And that's an opinion I've heard seconded by Mr. Parrott, our facilities director, in a variety of forums, and that it's worth saving. I have heard, and I take them with great respect, the concerns expressed about cost of operation, environmental impact of the building. The one point I would like to make about that is that, I was chatting about this issue with my sister, who's an architect, and she threw out at me a quote that I'd heard before, and I think is well known in circles among architects and preservationists, in that the quote is that the greenest building is the one that's already built. And that comes from a guy named Carl Elefante. He's a very prestigious, well-known architect, the past president of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, lecturer, environmentalist. And what he explains is that because that buildings cause global warming by consuming non-renewable energy for heating, cooling, lighting, and equipment, which are known as operational emissions. But also from building product manufacturing and construction, which in the business is known as embodied emissions. And so for many buildings, embodied emissions are equivalent to 2 decades or more of operational emissions. And he makes this point on his own website, this is Elefante, that retrofitting existing buildings to improve their performance can achieve energy efficiencies equivalent to new buildings, substantially reducing operational emissions while avoiding the immense embodied emissions from constructing a new building. Occupying, maintaining, renewing, and adapting existing buildings is the greenest approach and is especially crucial for meeting emissions reduction targets in the Paris Agreement on climate change. Of course, that is a massive masonry building with lots and lots of concrete and brick, and I just can't imagine the environmental impact of hauling that all off and starting all over again. So I'd leave it at that. I appreciated the discussion at the last select board meeting about a possible committee to work on this subject. And I was fairly sick last week, but felt compelled to go on the call and make the remark that if the Historic Commission is appointed or given a seat on this committee, that it seemed to me that our job would be to bring forward for your consideration, for the town's consideration, for the citizens of Southfield's consideration, the fact that there are numerous dozens of buildings throughout Massachusetts, historic schools that have been successfully adaptively reused and or are under consideration currently, because every town in this Commonwealth is grappling with this issue, historic schools and what to do with them and their surplus. And just to give you the shortest of short list, goodness, where is it? I had, bear with me 1 second. Cogswell School in Haverhill. This building was constructed, oh goodness, I don't have my my really good list at this point. I don't know what happened to it. it has now been redone. All these buildings were built. For some reason I've mislaid my list, but all these buildings were built between the 1860s and about 1920. This project, 1891, I'm sorry, remained in service for more than a century. It has now been adapted, reused into an arts center. Another one, the Wells School in Southbridge, Massachusetts. This has been a 106-year-old historic school building, is now apartments for seniors age 55 and up. The Walker School in Taunton, constructed in 1895. Former elementary school, now 40 units of affordable housing for seniors age 62 and older. Preservation Award winner from the Mass Historical Commission is the Wilbur School in Sharon. Colonial Revival School built in 1922. Closed in the early 80s, this building sat vacant for nearly a quarter of a century before being adaptively reused again into housing. I believe I mentioned on the select board call that there are no fewer than 8 schools in Springfield dating between 1868 and 1926 have been adaptively reused, 6 into housing, 1 into offices, and 1 back into a middle school. And I think that's enough. I mean, I could go on. One that stuck out to me because I looked at a condo in it once was the old Charlestown High School on Monument Square in Charlestown. Beautiful building that was bought by the architect Graham Gund in 1985 from the city of Boston and redone into, I believe, about 45. I think they're all market rate condos. And of course, our neighbor in Hopkinton, with I believe it's called their Center School, is dealing with this issue right now. So there are examples throughout the state of people working on this issue. And the last thing I would say is, well, two other minor things. One is one opportunity that the really excellent subcommittee report did not mention was something called the Massachusetts Preservation Projects Fund, which has a pool of about $1 million annually to fund both pre-development projects and development projects. So the pre-development projects are, of course, studies, feasibility studies, preparation of plans and whatnot. Development projects are submitted for construction activities, including stabilization, protection, rehabilitation, and restoration. There's a big pool of money there. It's available every year, and we could avail ourselves of it. On a local level, some of the projects you might be interested in round 29, Grafton got $70,000 for the public library. The Upton Grange got $50,000 for their Upton Center District 1 schoolhouse. In round 28, Fairhaven, for the Fairhaven High School, got $50,000. In round 27, Charlton got $5,000 for a Northside school. And in that round, by the way, St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Southborough got $50,000. So, you know, this is close to home. We can do it. The last thing I'll say is that because, you know, we've lost a lot in Southborough. I haven't been in this town all that long. I grew up in Northborough, but I've had a pretty quick education. And I'm saddened to think of all the things that have been lost. The Peters High School, of course, was the real jewel in the crown. And once a building is gone, it's gone. It's gone forever. And I think that our obligation to Southborough residents, particularly in Southville and Southborough history, is to make sure that we've exhausted every option before we choose the only option that's irrevocable, and that's demolition. And so I'm so happy to be here, and I now want to shut up and listen to the rest of you, because we don't have, we've talked about this on our calls. We don't have a proposal to make about what should be done. I want to listen to that part of it. All I want to say from the historical standpoint is, boy, a lot went into this building. We sure think it's damn good looking and worth saving. And again, because this idea that once it's gone, it's gone. Maybe it will be demolished. I mean, I always have to be open to that possibility. But before we go down that road, can we please, for the sake of our heritage, and because this, by the way, this site has site integrity, which often gets lost. In other words, it appears from the street, with the exception of that, elevator shaft that was put on in the 50s, pretty much as it looked when it opened. There've been some alterations, but nothing irrevocable. It can be put back to its past glory. But once we tear it down, there's no putting it back. So I think that I hope I fairly represented historical's position. You can say no when you get your chance. So thank you, Dorianne. And again, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you, Kevin. So Hassan has asked me to ask you to please shut your video off on your computer. So
I
if your
forgot that it was
computer is
on.
on, if you can mute the video and mute your speaker. Both, just as he's texting me, so. Okay, so you do not want that building torn down. That is your,
I would like that every option be considered
okay,
before that option comes into play. That seems reasonable.
very,
Let's consider every chance we have before we go to the what to me is the nuclear option, is to tear it down.
okay, I hear you loud and clear. Okay, Ben, would you like to speak on, have anything to say for CPC?
I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you.
First, Kevin, I've got another building for your list. My alma mater, Pomeroy Elementary School in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is in fact remarkably similar in scale to the South Union School, was converted by the city of Pittsfield to affordable housing. I'm going to say, at this point, 30 years ago. Anyhow, the Community Preservation Committee has been heavily invested in the South Union School going back for many years at this point. We've conducted several discussions about this. We haven't had a vote, but I feel very comfortable representing the opinions voiced by many on the committee that we find it to be a historically important part of and a vital part of the Southville part of town. And when I say that CPC has been invested in the building, CPC has recommended to town meeting investment of CPA funds in the building for many years now, totaling over $500,000. Things like the historic preservation of the windows, the repointing of the building, the construction of the playground. As the father of twins, I can say they're now older, but this playground is a favorite among the 2-year-old to 7-year-old set in town. It's widely viewed as the best playground for that age group. And finally, CPC also funded the efforts to get the building put on the National Register of Historic Places. I will say, starting 4 or 5 years ago, some of the first rumors of folks thinking perhaps it's time to dispose of the building started circulating around. This has spurred CPC to, from that point forward, to start requiring preservation restrictions on buildings on which historical preservation is funded with CPA funds, so that the investment isn't lost. I think that captures community preservation's view on the building. I will say that one of the topics that came up during our most recent discussion about it was if the building is going to be repurposed in some fashion, with all of the discussion recently of trying to get some affordable housing built here in town, I think it strikes many of us on the committee as potentially being a fantastic opportunity that would allow for the building to be preserved, for the playground to stay in place, for that beautiful streetscape from Highland Ave to stay in place, while providing the community with potentially some truly affordable housing.
Thank you, Ben. Freddie, would you like to speak for open space?
Sure. I'm the Freddie Gillespie, Chair of the Southborough Open Space Preservation Commission. And our charge is to facilitate the preservation of open space in town, in short term. And the commission has discussed this at quite a few meetings. And the topic that we focus on is open space and the value of the open space of this property. And we talk about in generic terms or general terms, you know, why do you preserve open space, protect it, or just preserve it? And then we went to specifics of how that relates to that property. So reasons to protect open space include wildlife habitat, which this doesn't really have, not the focus of this property, although there is value there. Scenic views, playgrounds. Size doesn't always dictate the value of open space. In many conferences, we hear how a smaller space that opens up the area to, especially in more urbanized or densely built areas, that opens up the area to green space, air, a sense of openness is very valuable, sometimes more so to those communities than a 10 times bigger parcel further and back out of sight. So visibility plays a role. Having valuable green space, the impact to the neighborhood, how people are using it, and the density of a neighborhood, again, comes up to the value of open space. Because the smaller parcel in a densely built area has greater value than you would if you're in an area with thousands of acres of open space and you're talking about a small parcel. It's different, right? So for the South Union School, we noted there's a playground, well utilized. That's an open space value that can't be understated, especially in that portion of town, which doesn't have as much open space, just free open space where kids can go and run and play, even without a playground, because it's the densest built section of town. Right before we had zoning, that area was built with small houses for the woolen mills. Those lot sizes are grandfathered in, but some of them are like 9,000 square feet. We also have, we all know, the transit development proposals coming in. So that section of town is going to become even more densely built out. So that green space is even more critical. And even before the transit development, I might be saying it wrong, zoning proposals are coming in, which is requiring 15 units an acre.
The MBTA communities.
MBTA communities, I think. 15 acres a unit. You don't need 15 units an acre. You don't need many parcels to do that, to drastically change the layout of that community in that neighborhood. And the fact that there's no playgrounds aside from that in that area that are open during school hours for parents to bring their children. So in addition to the playground, you have the park in front. That grassy area, that is a park, and it is used as a park. And I didn't even know about the sledding to the selectmen's meeting, but I mean, it makes.
Great sledding, sorry.
Okay, so I didn't know about that, but we knew the park was well utilized. And even if it's only by driving by it when you're headed home, and it's that, or if it's walking your dog or taking a walk down the street, which we see many people doing, that park is open and airy and has a value. It helps clean the air. And, don't think that the air in that area doesn't need help. You've got highways bypassing, you've got the trains. There's a lot of pollutant contribution. And having one place where you can go where maybe you're not all hedged in is valuable. We also looked at the historic landscape. and I won't go into the history of it, but I was chair of the CPC when we did those projects, and it's unfortunate we don't have a recording of Kate Madison telling us the value of that building for not just being a school and the architecture, but what it represented on a hill overlooking the old woolen mill, teaching the children of the immigrants who were working there, and a sense of the American dream and promise that represented. And if you could hear her say that and know that we could put that back into our history, I feel that every time I drive down Southfield Road and look up, not during the summer when the trees are in leaf, but you can see that building with its commanding presence over a neighborhood that was, you know, a mill, and then it was factory. So there's value in that sense of viewscape. Historic landscapes are valued by the state, not just, you know, open space commissions, but that adds additional value. So the site views from Southfield Road and on to Highland Street are critically important. The Open Space Preservation Commission discussed this most recently at our October 2nd meeting. And we determined that the use of the building, we all have the right to our personal opinions, but that's outside the scope of our commission's work. How the building itself is used, it's the interior saying. I will note, if you're there, you will see a sign out front that says the Open Space Preservation Commission. And I will tell you that at one point, we had space there, we had storage space there, we had meeting space there. And at one point, we were unceremoniously booted out. And today, we have storage in my car, in a shed at Breakneck Hill, in some Tupperware totes at the senior center, and in various commission members' houses, homes, wherever. You know, and we have never been approached on where they might want to find space for us. So I would say we're not the only commission facing this sort of situation, and this has been for years. This is not temporary, right? So if you're reusing the building, you know, we'd like some space to put our stuff. I'd like to get some of this stuff out of my car, out of the senior center, out of a shed, out of other people's yards, in my basement, in my office, and other members' areas as well. You know, it's not a way to treat a commission that works as hard as we do. I'm just mentioning that because it says Open Space Preservation Commission out front. In case you're wondering, we do have a little bit of a concern that if you're going to reuse it, you know, maybe find some space for us. So we have no other opinion on the use of the building, but we did take a vote on October 2nd, and it says the OSPC, the Open Space Preservation Commission, the OSPC finds that the playground and green park in front of the building provide significant and valuable open space to the community, and therefore recommend any future disposition of the property requires no net loss of land to development. Additionally, that the building footprint should not increase. Finally, that a perpetual preservation restriction be placed on the land and playground if the property is sold. CJ motion to approve, Jones seconded, all in favor, passed unanimous.
So basically, you don't want any changes to that property at all, but you would not have a problem with changing the interior of the building, but the outside stays.
We don't feel there's any, you know, we read your report, and thank you, I should have started with that. It was a
But
well-done
no additional
report.
buildings, no change of the building, maintaining the way it is right now on the outside, but you have no problem with altering the inside.
The interior of the building, or who's using the interior of the building, is not within our purview. The land around it, we talked about the parking lot, like why would you say no net change in that? Because you need a parking lot for the park. And how are you, you know, when you look at the lot, how are you going to get there? And the significance of the front stairway, I mean, that's part of the historic landscape. Having another, you need parking if you're going to use the parking lot and to use the building. And where are you going to put it? I know there's some treed area around it that adds value to the neighborhood of having green space. So correct. No net loss of any of the land that's not got a building on.
Only
it now.
interior changes. No changes, okay. Thank you, Freddie. Is all set?
Yeah, that was it. I
Okay,
do the
okay.
motion.
Jen, would you like to speak for recreation? And you have
Sure.
Kristen here.
So,
I don't know if anybody else on this is.
yeah,
on your
I'm not sure,
board.
but that's okay. I think that, so a big part of this is like we're here to participate and be part of this conversation as one of the tenants in the building.
Yes.
But also, I mean, like, we invested and built that playground and we hold programming and that building is full, like around the clock, like every inch of it that we could possibly use, we are using. So it's more about, being a part of the conversation and being able to share what we know to be true when questions or things arise about like, well, how much space is actually there? What are you actually doing with it? Is it really being utilized? Like, is it really that horrible with all the expenses? Because we chip in and like recreation helps pay for a lot of the costs to also run the building and upkeep it. So it's more about us being a part of the conversation so we can share what we know. Because a lot of what we've heard to date is hearsay or people kind of saying things about our program or what we do. We just want to be able to share what we know to be true and have a conversation about it. So
That's why you are here. We want to hear what you have to say.
So I think definitely about the playground, like agree with what's been said there, like there aren't other options south side of town. And I know this came up, I think it was a couple of years ago when they were talking about potentially trying to sell the building. And there are other ideas raised about that playground, about moving it. Moving a playground is a non-starter. We cannot move a playground. We just would lose it, right? So that investment, if it were to be taken away, we can't salvage any of those parks or reuse them for safety reasons. So I know it was addressed before, but just like putting on the table, like you can't move that playground. And it is packed and like recreation offices there with the windows open this summer, like there's kids like year round packed in that playground, a lot of use. And then the building is jam packed as well, like through all seasons. And I know right now through the winter season, we have challenges and contention because more people want to use the space than we have time available to give them. So things like that. So as we're thinking about the future of this building, want to be a part of the solution as to what happens with Rec's assets and where Rec goes and ensuring that whatever happens, we can still service the community at the same level or better than what we're doing today. So
I don't think the plan is to kick you out and give you nowhere to go. So, and I don't
Right,
think
but I
there's
think it's
really
more
a
about,
plan. We just, yeah.
right. Over the last several years, as this keeps coming up, there are some crazy ideas that we have heard that we're like, oh no, that would not happen. But that's why we're here, right? To have these conversations and make sure more of the people that will be making these decisions understand what makes Rec successful, especially off the backs, like to give kudos to Tim and his leadership. Like the department has like exploded the last several years under his leadership and like so much more programming, so more people involved that we're busting at the seams. So like we need more space, but we want to do it in the right way and not hurt what we've built.
Just a question, is the top floor being utilized? Is that part of the, what part of the building is not finished yet? Because it's over 10,000 square feet. We're only using 6,700
So-
that's finished.
We use it even though it's not
So
technically finished.
we use it even though it's not finished. I mean, the unfinished area is storage.
Okay.
Storage for rec, storage for youth and family. Facilities uses a lot of it for storage as well. So every corner that's not finished per se is
It's
storage.
storage.
But
so it
even
is
I would
being
say like
utilized.
the pottery studio is probably technically unfinished
Yeah.
on the books, right?
Or
So we've got a pottery studio in the basement. It actually made me wonder if some of the top floor is considered unfinished, even though you.
Yeah, I would have to see what's
Pseudo
classified, I
finished and
guess.
we're using it anyways, so.
Just
yeah.
the classification.
Jesse,
Can I ask a question?
yes, sir.
And this is purely out of, ignorance. Have there been any discussions about what site you would relocate to if that were to?
So I will say in the last year, we've been pulled in and included on the new community center committee to start talking about like if a school came offline, if we use it, or like where would a community center be? So that we've been involved in for the last year. So there's a lot of conversations about how moving into a decommissioned school and having full access to program, a gym would be amazing. But But so far, that's like officially been the extent of conversations.
Al, can you tell me what school they're considering, like moving the community center to? The last one, I apologize for my ignorance that I haven't been following that committee at all.
Yeah, I can give you sort of an update. Maybe what would be helpful is to sort of describe what the select board is doing and what we haven't done, and the decisions that we haven't made, because we haven't made any decisions. I think everybody knows that we're currently in the throes of trying to figure out what we do with Neary School. And how many schools we actually need, given the school population that we currently have and are likely to have. Our schools at one point served over 1,600 students, and now our school age population, this is K-8 now, is in the 1,200 range. And I don't think anyone expects us to get back to 1,600 or even approach that number in the near future. We know that Neary is 50 years old, 50 plus years old, and is in need of a major renovation or something like it. And so we are, and this is the capital budget, and there's a committee to work on that issue, to really figure out whether we need 3 schools or 4 schools in our K-8 system. And if we only need 3, what we do with Neary to make sure that we accommodate and provide a quality system. So realistically, we are between now and when a school building might become available, we're talking about 4 to 5 years. It will be the single most expensive thing we've ever done. The state is not going to pick up a huge chunk of this, and the per square foot costs are truly frightening. The numbers of in excess of $700 a square foot are being bandied about.
So that would be about $100 million project plus. That's what it cost in Andover for roughly the same size school that was done.
I don't want to put a hard
No,
number
but
on
I
it,
just-
but
don't.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
a lot of money. Yes, it's certainly tens of millions, and we're not talking the low end of the range.
Have they ever looked at putting a 3rd floor on Woodward?
I don't know the answer to that. Again, I haven't dug into that. That's not that's not my particular bailiwick. But yeah, yes, I don't know the answer to that. If there is a school that becomes surplus, it is likely to be Finn. That is a decision which is being driven by the state. That is the because the state has given us a lot of money to build schools, and so they think they've got a right to say which school we might or might not declare as surplus. So today's thought is that it might be Finn. It will probably be something on the order of 1.5 to 2 years before we actually face making the decision as to what to do. And as I said, it'll probably be 4 to 5 years before the entirety of that decision works its way through. So in the event that a school becomes available for municipal use, I think it's perfectly rational to say that the activities that are currently taking place in 21 Highland would probably want to move to the schools or some other site, and that building might become surplus to the existing needs of the municipality. And so what the select board has done is said, and I've spent some time in the building, I spent quite a bit of time in the building. I've been through the building with our facilities department on several occasions. I arranged for an energy audit to be done to look at the feasibility of putting in heat pumps and insulation. The building is, on an operational extent, very, very energy inefficient. To give you an idea, my house costs, which is a house built in 1980s, doesn't meet the current standards, but it met the standards in the 1980s. Costs about 55 cents a square foot to heat. this building costs over $1 a square foot to heat. So it's a masonry building. It's got, it's our value of its walls is about 2. It's a fact of life for masonry buildings. If we renovate that building in any way, shape, or form, we're going to have to bring it up to code. And, the current codes would require bringing it up to an R of about 21 on the walls and a lot more on the ceiling. So the renovation of that building is going to be 7 figures, any way you cut it. I also met with the neighborhood to talk about what was important to them in that facility and in the site. And they certainly mentioned the playground and the sledding hill. I'm a big fan of sledding hills. And they were not real excited about the idea of affordable housing, but I think that some work needs to be done there. So what the select board wants to do is to appoint a commission to essentially begin the process of envisioning what we do with the building in the event that it becomes surplus to our municipal needs. And the current proposal is to have a 7-member commission with representatives from open space, historical, and recreation, and 4 at-large members, 2 of which would be members who live within half a mile of the community of the facility. As I think many people have noted, this is a neighborhood asset, and so the goal here is to have a report in about a year, a little less than a year, by June 30th, because it's an ad hoc committee. It kind of has to go year to year. So we're looking at that. Again, we have 4 to 5 years to sort of sort out the future of the building, but we'd like to at least approach it from that perspective. That is, give this particular committee the task of envisioning what we do, what happens to this building if it becomes surplus to our needs. It may not. We may end up deciding that we need 4 schools, in which case we have to go to Plan B. And right now, I'm not sure we have I know for a fact we don't have a well thought out plan of what Plan B is. But again, we have 4 to 5 years time frame. So that's the long-winded way of answering your question.
Okay, Freddie?
I just want to respond. I think it's still Shopsy's conversation, but I wanted to respond to Al's recent comment. And I want to applaud the select board for talking about this new committee. But I want to make a comment for you to bring back to them to consider. When this Capital and Shopsy committee was formed and you worked on this report, which you put a lot of time and energy into it, and there's a lot of great stuff there. At the time, I advocated that you need to have all the stakeholders at the table. And I would advocate that you still need all the stakeholders at the table. And I know you're saying you want a 7-member committee, maybe 4 at large, cut that back if you don't have 9, because I know the planning board, which is in charge of planning for the town, should have in my opinion, should have a seat, as well as Shopsy should have a seat. Until the committee decides what they're doing with the building, you shouldn't be cutting people out. And I think that was a problem with the committee you were on originally, that it didn't have everyone there, because now here we are. And everyone here at the table, my opinion is we should have been at the table at the beginning. And that might have meant a report somewhat different than what you have, but that isn't going to be disregarded if we're now having a committee that says Shopsy's not at the table. So that's just an opinion. Mine personally, not my commission.
So my original draft was a 9-person commission, and it did have Shopsy and planning in that. There was a lot of concern about a 9-person committee being somewhat dysfunctional because it's difficult to get 9 people in the room on a regular basis. That was certainly one of the reasons why we reduce the size of the advisory committee because they were simply having trouble finding enough common times when they could meet to reduce the quorum size. The second thing was the select board wanted to see new faces on this. Yeah, as I say, I didn't agree, but that was the project. They wanted to see new faces. I will say that my expectation is that the boards and commissions should play an active role, even, they should participate in the meeting just as you participate in any other meeting. And should certainly make their thoughts known. But I think there was there was a certain amount of enthusiasm from the neighbors that they wanted to participate in this process. And frankly, we need new blood in our town commissions and committees. And so I think that was the reason to have more at large and less of, please forgive me, the same old faces, being one of the same old faces myself.
Hey. I can appreciate that, but the way to have a cohesive unit working together, we are a community, we're a family in Southborough, and to say, well, you're the same old faces that have been working on committees for years, we want new blood. I don't think that's sending the right message. It's kind of insulting to the people who have been giving their life's work to the town and giving a lot of themselves to the town. I, for one, have been a 30-year volunteer in this town. Shopsy has worked very hard. We are a stakeholder at 21 Highland, and I don't want to see the building torn down. I'd like to see it somehow be helpful to people who are in need of housing. And I think there's a way of doing that, and there's a correct way to do it. And we should be one of the members of that board, and planning should be. So I would like to see the select board reconsider taking out one of the at-large members and one of the neighbor members and adding the two committees that really should be playing a serious role in this. Because if affordable housing was to go in there, you need Shopsy in there. So just a request to ask them to reconsider. I understand and that you wanted 9 to begin with.
First off, this isn't me.
No, Al, no. And that's why I'm saying, and I appreciate the
My
fact that
advice
you
would
wanted
be-
9, but I would request that they reconsider how they're forming that committee. The fact that they're forming it is very appreciated. I can understand that, but I really believe firmly that planning and Shopsy should be involved in that. We are stakeholders. And
Historic.
I would recommend.
well, no, historic is going to be on it.
Oh,
And
not the other.
yeah. So
Oh, that's-
historic, open space,
Recreation.
recreation. There's 2 members, 2 neighbors that live within a half a mile, kind of like the MBTA, half a mile from the building, and 2 members at large. And I think it's more advantageous to all of us, especially those of us sitting here and those of us who have worked very hard for the town and have been here for a very long time. We know the history, we know what's going on, and we would like to be part of that. And I would just appreciate it if you wouldn't mind going back to the select board and asking them to reconsider the formation of that ad hoc committee.
I would recommend that you attend Tuesday night's meeting and make your best pitch. I can certainly carry the message, but
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Can I chime in on that? Because I also support the original 9-person proposal, and I sort of feel like, it's like throwing a dinner party, a big dinner party is a lot harder than a small one. But the gain, I don't know, I do think it's important to have, all parties represented, and if people don't show up for some of the meetings, of course, reducing it from 9 to 7 reduces the quorum by 1. Not significant to me. And if people don't show up for those meetings, groups that have a seat on it, they're not going to have the influence that they want. So it's in everybody's interest to show up to the meetings and hack it out and be a difficult big family if it needs to get some work done. And while I have the floor, I just want to throw in one of the things, because back to stuff Freddie was talking about the role of this building in the community life. And also the way, and this is the historical perspective, I think the way the life of a building changes, you know, if this building is substantially renovated, it won't be the first time. There was a 4-year renovation project in the early 1950s done on this building to upgrade older school buildings in town before commencing construction on Woodward. So, you know, and again, in 2003, an elevator, you know, was added, a major alteration to the building. My point is that buildings evolve over time. Even its place in the community has evolved over time. I think a lot of people don't know that for 38 years, until 1953, part of South Union housed the Southville Branch Library. Very important part of the community. There's the National Register narrative notes that there's a historic photograph that exists showing a small wood frame structure that was constructed on the roof of the school for use as an aircraft warning observatory during World War II. So sometimes it's a library, sometimes it's looking for enemy planes, sometimes it's, we have an applicant for our last open seat on historical right now that I hope will be interviewed and confirmed at the next select board meeting, who, when I chatted with her, you know, preliminary to saying, great, I'm very enthusiastic about this person, said that she attended 3rd grade at the school, 4th generation Southborough resident. So, you know, there's a lifeblood that I think courses through. And this, again, this goes back to why we're so interested. It's had a role as a sledding hill, an arts center, a school, a library, and Lord only knows, you know, what it could be going forward. And I'm again, and you know, one of them, when I finally got my list of some of the schools that I was putting together that have been done successfully in Massachusetts, and one I left out, and this was a real bomb to me, was the headline from a newspaper down in Sandwich. Wing Elementary School received state funding, and the headline is Wing School Project receives millions from state. And I won't bore you with this, but this is a project in which the original 1927 school is only going to have about, I think, 10 units of, this is senior housing, affordable housing. And then they're going to do something that I think the Shopsy subcommittee had sort of explored and build out the site a little bit with other buildings for it's a very large project that they're going to sell the building to a developer for $1 million plus. And then the Stratford Capital Group doing this project expects to receive 70% of the $53 million that this project is going to cost in state and other funding. So there, again, I'm just trying to throw out the possibilities and the avenues that exist. And I think I'm excited about this, you know, the select board seats the committee to start doing some digging. It's going to be a lot of work. So if you sign up for this, be prepared. But I think there are possibilities.
Thank you, Kevin. Kristen has had her hand up for like a long
Okay,
time.
all right. Can I
just
just
step
speak to her then?
Kristen, can you unmute yourself? Oh, you did. You're good to
I
go.
did. Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. This is quick. One is just a comment that I agree with the discussion about the 9 members. I understand quorum can be a challenge, but you know, it can work in the opposite way too. Whereas right now in CPC, we only have 5. And we all have to be there. And the other night I had to leave at 9. And so we all had to end. And so not having that other position filled has definitely been hurting us. My question I have a question and then maybe an action point for this group coming out of this is that, does anyone know, this question came up in CPC and I don't think we knew the answer. If we were having a rec meeting right now and I'm on Zoom because my daughter's high school game started an hour late. If we had quorum, but I was on camera and on Zoom, does that count as quorum? Because I think that makes a huge difference in people I would not be able to be there tonight because of the circumstances that happened today. I've known about this forum, but no, my husband had to go out of town, so I have the kids. My daughter's game started late, but I was still able to come here and I was still able to join. And I think that's what we realized through COVID. So I get much less worried about meeting quorum if Zoom is still an option, because, you know, getting there physically versus just getting there wherever you are is a big difference, obviously.
My understanding is that remote participation was actually an option even before COVID, that members of a committee could attend by voicemail or by voice. So unless the state changes the rules, and I don't think they're going to, but I could be wrong, remote participation is considered perfectly fine.
Yeah, it was always allowed. You had to fill out a form, you had to be approved by your chair, and then you could do remote, but the chair had to be physically in the room.
And the remote person didn't count towards quorum.
Oh, they don't correct.
They did not.
Back in the day, it
Previously.
did not count.
Oh, but
Now
they do
they-
now.
I don't know. I probably still the same rules.
I
but
believe
yeah.
they do.
They do now.
They-
Because
they
the
do
select
now.
board meets.
My
remotely.
understanding is they do now. If you come in on Zoom.
Yeah.
You are counted in a quorum.
Now, but
Yes.
previously that was
Previous,
not. the case.
yeah, I don't know about but now they do count. So Kristen, you're counting towards your quorum, but you don't have one yet.
Yeah, so I just, you know, I understand what your point, Alan. Will show up to the meeting and make those points, but I think that should be taken into consideration that we've seen it become a lot easier to get there. And the last thing is just a note that, like, I've been really loved hearing from Freddie and from Kevin about the history. One thing, I guess, if we're starting our list is, as we're digging, like, we're going to be unearthing the history and recording the history of the building, which I think is exciting for all of the town. I assume that's something we'll be doing. Freddie, you mentioned Kate Madison and you wished you had recorded when she was talking about the history. Is that something that you think we could entertain doing again? Or, you know, did she have any written materials? I'm just curious.
Any of her files would probably reside with the Historical Commission. We didn't have any recordings of her. For those that don't know, Kate Madison was a devoted member of the Historical Commission and dedicated member of the Community Preservation Committee, and she passed away. And so many of the projects, great historical projects in town, got done because of her dedication and hard work. So I can't bypass not honoring her at this time, but it's unfortunate, you know, but no, we don't, I don't have any, you know, besides the minutes, which could never describe what she presented to us. You know, there were no PowerPoints or anything. It was her describing what, you know, her knowledge. Some of that might be somewhere in your records.
I believe she did keep a blog as well. Is that
Yes.
actually still up? So I haven't looked up South Union, but I have looked up other buildings that she had written about, and that is still out there.
So just so that we're clear about this, the task of this commission is not to look backwards. If we have to find a new use for the building, if it becomes surplus to our needs, it's all very well and good to look at the historical use of the building and tell the story of the building. But first and foremost, we have to figure out what we're going to do with the building or how the building could be used. And so that is the real work. You know, I don't want us to spend a lot of time looking backwards. Frankly, we've got to look forwards because we need to have a plan for what we're going to do with the building going forward.
Right.
Right.
I would just argue that there's people in the town that would like to see it demolished, right? There's the people in the town who, you know, when numbers are thrown around, they're like, forget it. I think that's where the history comes into play.
I think it's
Because it
important to
might
remember.
persuade them to look at it a little bit differently, not just an old building, but an old building with a heck of a lot of history for the town. So I do think it's relevant.
Can I chime in?
Okay, Tom.
Oh, sorry, this, so just, I'm Tom Biscoe from Shopsy. So just trying to reconcile, you know, everyone in this room has their own particular interests in the property, open space, and historic and shops. And of course, from Shopsy's standpoint, you know, there's the affordability of housing in Southborough is, as everyone knows, a huge problem. And, we're becoming Dover and Weston, the houses cost $950,000 single family homes. And that's where we're sort of headed if we don't have more affordable options for people that have normal incomes. And so, from Shop's standpoint, we're desperately trying on a month-to-month basis to find out any other areas in Southborough where we can create affordable housing, but there's also a need for just housing that's affordable. Multifamily housing is, I won't go on a soapbox for a long time, but multifamily housing is one option to create housing units that are affordable for normal people, even if they're not income restricted affordable housing. That said, with respect to 21 Highland, this is an unbelievable opportunity to create affordable housing. There are lots of 40B projects around town, but if everyone knows the basics of 40B projects, only a certain small percentage of the units that are given 40B project need to be affordable in the traditional sense of income restricted, and the rest are market rate. So the 21 Highland property is a unique opportunity to potentially have a truly affordable housing project with, let's just call it 15 to 30 units of housing that are all affordable, 100% affordable. So from Shop's standpoint, this is a really great opportunity that, it isn't really available to have a public piece of property that's potentially available for that type of conversion. Nearest school certainly wouldn't be. It's too big of an asset. This is the right size, and it's also, a property that I think can reconcile a lot of the concerns that people have here. So, for instance, for open space, obviously developing of new housing, new buildings, thematically is in contravention of somebody who wants to preserve open space without anything being touched. But I think with this site, it's a big enough space that the two interests could be reconciled. This is 3 acres. I gave the example in our report of a project in Hudson that was roughly half the size, and they got a 40 unit project on that. So I think there's room on this site to both construct new affordable housing units and preserve playground and preserve a good chunk of the front part of the property, because there's enough space there to do both. And of course, a component of that is to incorporate the existing school building into the affordable housing project design. In our view, it shouldn't only be the reuse conversion of the school building, but there needs to be other buildings as well to make the project economically feasible and give us a higher number of affordable units. But in terms of the town having to shoulder the burden of that reuse, if this were devoted to affordable housing, really the best option to do that wouldn't be for the town to do it themselves. It would be for the town to do a public-private partnership and essentially donate the land and the property to a private developer who would come in, and these people can navigate the alphabet soup of state government entities and grant programs and things like that. And there are there are developers out there specifically who are specialists at converting old school buildings and historical buildings to affordable housing. And they know all of it. I certainly don't, but they know all the strategies for getting hold of the funds to make that economically feasible. So if we did go that direction of affordable housing, the cost to convert the building to a more efficient building wouldn't be shouldered by the town. The town would be, their investment would be donating the land to this purpose and letting a developer handle it from there. So I think there are ways, obviously, from Shop's standpoint, we think the best use of the property would be to convert it to affordable housing. But I think it can do so while reconciling a lot of the other interests in this room and the neighbors. So
So just quickly, I worked past the Community Preservation Act in the town of Southborough. It was a ballot question. Didn't go through, went through town meeting once and didn't pass, and then we, some people got together, we didn't even know each other, and campaigned to get it on the ballot, and then it was a petition, and then we passed it. And one of the biggest things we talked about, if people laughed when we said we were going to try again, we said, it failed before, the economy was worse. They said, no one's going to do this again. Just not going to happen. But we plugged away at it. And one of the biggest things was, we don't want this to look like any town USA. As you lose your heritage, you don't want to be plopped down here and it looks the same as if you were plopped down 100 miles, 1,000 miles away. There's a value to the character. And I've also heard some people thinking that building's not as, beautiful as they would like some building that's maybe in Back Bay or, down in Newport, but it has great value and historical value. And the point to Al's comment about not looking back, I get that, but you make the statement, if it's determined to be surplus. So who's determining that? And if this committee's just going to be, I think that needs to be clear. We're only deciding what to do because the building has been determined to be surplus. I think we need to understand who's determining that. And if it's surplus, that we're keeping the building and not tearing it down, because I think that's one of the reasons we're looking at the history. If everyone just says, okay, bottom line, we're not going to tear the building down. What do you want? That's a blue sky conversation, very different than should we tear it down or not? And you're going to have different opinions on that in the committee, which is why the history is important, which is why the viewscape was important. But again, I keep coming back to, we don't want to look like any town USA. And that building there for that portion of town is critically important. So that's why the historical landscape's important, and why the Open Space Commission, we looked at it. We spent time there individually, because we didn't have a site walk together, but we had pictures and we discussed it. That whole view from lower is important. So all of the land in front of the building is important. And anyhow, I also want to say I did hear some of your consultants and architects that gave presentations, and they talked about how important that building was. And I'm also very well aware, I've done a deep dive into affordable housing when I sat on the CPC. And I've talked with many of the state's best experts. I actually, before we passed the CPA, how I got involved is I was selected by the state to attend a 12-week community preservation academy. And I worked with some of the best experts in the state that came in and all of the aspects, it was a deep dive, really quite incredibly intense. And this whole concept of the affordable partnership with the community developer builders, definitely the way to go, but you need a certain amount to make that feasible. And I don't see putting that many units on the property. So I don't mean to get into this, the building itself, you want to put affordable in there. But I think the standard is like 35 units to make it financially feasible. No,
I don't know. I'm just saying that's too many.
Yeah, I mean, I can weigh in on that a little bit, because I spoke to some of the CDCs and they say, basically a lot of them, without getting too far in the weeds, use low-income housing tax credits, which are tax credits that are done on a per unit basis. So in order to make a project economically feasible, you have to have enough units to get those tax credits to make enough money to fund the development. So I think the number that probably came from me at one of my presentations before the select board. The person I spoke to, that the general rule of thumb is that it needs to be around 30, but that's not a hard and fast rule. In other words, it's a combination of funding sources that go into this. So, for instance, if the developer doesn't have to pay for the land, and if affordable housing trust funds are introduced to the equation, then the developer doesn't need 30 units of tax credits to be able to fund the project. So it's a sort of malleable mix of different funding sources to make it work.
So
But they definitely need more than six units that would be in the building.
So I will just say this on a, the Community Preservation Committee's had we've had 3 workshops on affordable housing. And 2 of them were with this community builder concept, I'm not sure, the nonprofit. And one of them, I don't know how many years ago, but they said often it takes about 10 years. I don't know, this was a long time ago, it can take up to 10 years to get all the tax credits. And this was for a major project, right? We'd be there by now if we get started then. So if this isn't the site and we're talking 4 years down the road and before we determine if it's a surplus building or not, or if the other schools are available, I would love to see some work on looking at some other properties that I'd love to have the conversation with you, because I have knowledge of other properties that, not saying instead of, but just to also be considering. I know you've been working hard on it, but getting the large scale, shouldn't say large scale, but not 2 units, 1 house, which is what we've been doing, is to get a substantial CPC. Actually, a lot of people in town did have a recommendation for 25 acres to be used this way, and it didn't get to town meeting, unfortunately. And every board and commission and committee, 9 and 2, which included 2 nonprofits, all voted to recommend that we go to town meeting to move this forward, and it didn't happen. It was a Chapter 61 property. But, we should be looking at those sorts of opportunities where there's a chunk of land where you can, do a real community accepted. And that was the other problem with this proposal. I'll just say that, is that by coming out with just the capital and Shopsy plan for the property, and you didn't have all the people at the table. And what I know of this town, and most towns anyhow, for community housing, it's not just affordable always with CPA money. Community housing project development, I don't like saying projects, people think projects, right? You have to have everyone coming into town meeting, because it's going to require a town meeting vote to dispose of the property, I believe. You're disposing of it. Everyone needs to walk in there holding hands and singing Kumbaya. And if you have one group not in favor, it's a 2/3 vote, not easy to get, even when people are all online. And what's happened now is we've missed our opportunity for a first impression. So now it's not just making the impression that you want this to move forward positively. You have to dispel all the negative feedback that's out there already, because it came out without having consensus amongst all the stakeholders.
Okay, well, I'm going to address that. So
Okay.
I'm going to take full blame on that. So the purpose of that subcommittee being created was to do an initial educational study of what the history, what the possibilities possibly could be. With that study, then the next step would have been to bring in all the stakeholders and to sit down with information in front of you. The purpose wasn't to leave anyone out. The purpose was to get capital to kind of look at numbers and to get Shopsy with people who kind of knew how to pull that type of stuff together with planning, Tom's expertise in the real estate market, to take a look at that piece of property. What are the possibilities? That was step 1. It was an educational subcommittee. It was to get information. That's all it was. It was fact finding. It wasn't a decision-making thing. It was step 1. The next step would be to get the stakeholders involved. Here's our basis. Here's some basic information that we have gathered from a study we've done. Here's step 1. Now we go to the next step. It wasn't to leave people out. It wasn't to be the big dogs on the scene and to take control and to run with it. That was not the purpose of it. And I will take full blame, because that was me. I wanted this
But I will
subcommittee.
say, if you read that report all the way through and you get to the end of it, because I know I did, and I know Dom and our committee also did, we got to the end and we're like, okay, they're not telling us what to do. There's a whole bunch of information here.
Yes.
So we appreciated that recreation and understood once we read it, like, okay, got it. This makes sense.
If I
So
could dovetail on that, I honestly, just because I was in the middle of it, we were very conscious not to take policy positions
Mhm.
in the way we're doing this. We really viewed this as a glorified book report. We're not, different people on the committee had different ideas of whether, keeping the building or not was a big subject that was talked about. And I kept saying, and the committee members kept saying, hey, we're not here to make a decision whether it's good or bad to keep the building. We're here to give information that's relevant to a decision whether to keep the building or not. It's a historical building, that there's a bylaw that goes to historical buildings. Here are the pros and cons of that bylaw, but that could be applied. So honestly, Freddie, we really were trying to be non-policy, not a policy making body.
Information only, that's all it was.
Can I say,
And they did
no
a great job.
blame, because there's no blame in this. This is just even around this table, we're a group of people who have the best interest of this town, maybe with specific interests we're more focused on, but there's a lot of, even the Open Space Commission's vote, we're not always just, we're not looking at affordable housing or not considering historic or recreation. We have a charge, that's our charge, but so no blame. And I also always say in town government, in any of the decisions that are made, it's always the perception, not the reality. The perceptions is what counts. And what happened is, for whatever reason, and I'm certainly guilty of it, when that committee was first formed, I asked that all the stakeholders be at the table. Because it was formed in
Who did you ask?
selectmen. I was at a selectmen's meeting.
Okay, I formed the committee and I asked the selectmen to approve the committee so we could get going on the work. And it was a fact-finding committee. And these gentlemen put their hearts and soul in it. They worked on it for 18 months. They did exactly what they were asked to. But nobody said anything to us about, the other stakeholders, because I would have explained to you, all we're doing right here, right now, is getting information for everyone so that we can take this information, be educated with this information, and be able to go forward with that building. That was the sole purpose of it. They did an outstanding job. I was so proud of the report that they did. And if somebody wants to be upset about who was included, I'm going to take full blame on it, because capital was key for finances. If we looked at that, if we had to, if you tear it down, if you this, they looked at that and we got their perspective, and Shopsy with housing. And pretty much you can see the report. It's about affordable housing because it was our report. But I'm very proud of that report, and I will stand by it, and I will take full blame for not including other stakeholders. That was not the purpose. The purpose was a fact-finding, educational purpose for that building so we could move forward with the stakeholders next. So if you are offended by how we handled it, I apologize. There was no intent to insult anyone or leave anyone out. It was a fact-finding mission. They did an outstanding job. I stand by the report, and I stand by the way it was set up. So if somebody wants upset, I'm the buck stops right here. I'm sorry. And I did not mean to insult anyone, but they did more than I would have expected. They did an outstanding job. So Jen, you had something to say?
I gotta bring us back.
A while ago, I'm so sorry.
That's
Yes,
okay.
Bring us back, bring us back.
So there was one thing, so when we talk about this building, I feel like there's a lot of fear around how much it costs, and it's expensive and like this. And when we talk about it's not the most energy efficient, but so recreation kicks in to help cover some of the costs as we run programming and make money off of these things. So it goes back into the general fund. The annual cost for maintenance and operational budget in our budget every year, it's $55,000 a year. So this isn't when people so I hear there's a little bit of it's a money pit, it's sinking this, we pay $55,000 a year to keep this building up and running, and it houses 2 of our departments and holds a ton of community programming. So to me, that doesn't sound like it's a money pit and a huge waste of money. Or when we talk about down the line, there's a lot of conversations or fear around it's going to cost us millions for these things coming down the line. And as tenants of the building, we're aware of what needs to be done, or if we need to do maintenance. none of that has come to us or ever been discussed with like John Parent on this at all. So the perception that we have as tenants of the buildings is not like kind of like this, I feel like this rumor going around town. So that's like one of the big things that we wanted to make sure that like, I don't feel like we're in a hurry to like ditch this thing as fast as possible to like avoid millions and millions of dollars investing in it. And nothing of that has ever come across our tables at all in any of these conversations, or even like, I mean, every so often the town comes back to us and they're like, hey, Rick, can we have a little more money, right? Like, so we review all these finances and try to find the right way to make sure that the revolving fund can keep chipping in and helping with these costs. So like I would, if we have like hard numbers and data and official reports around this, like I'd love to actually have these published, but I do know like the 55,000 a year to keep the building up and running. It's like, it's in our budget, it's a line item and anyone can get that same information from town hall, right? So, yeah.
How much,
So just to address that for a moment. Because as I say, I've been through the building in detail with Mr. Parent. And you're correct, you know, the sort of near-term operating expenses are roughly $55,000 a year. We do need to remember that we've invested something in the neighborhood of $500,000 over the last 15 years in the building as well. And as a public entity, we never think about depreciation because we don't pay taxes. And so there's no concept of sort of a revolving fund for capital replacement. The building can, and one of the questions I asked him, you know, the building can stumble along, pardon my use of that word, for another 5 to 10 years, hopefully, without us having to put big bucks into it.
What's big bucks sell?
Pardon?
What's seven? Are we talking high seven figures? We talking 1 million? We talking 3 million, 5 million?
Well, I'll tell you what big bucks is in terms of work. You know, it's a roof. It's a heating system. You know, we're looking at maybe switching over to heat pumps. I'm not convinced that's going to save us any money.
And John's looked at that, right?
So,
Well, so I arranged for National Grid to come in and do the energy audit.
but part of that is if there is a, like, in the not too distant future, a plan to repurpose it, we wouldn't be investing that money in it anyways, right?
I don't know. We don't know.
I know, but I guess when we talk about this building, I feel like talking about like, oh, we might need a new roof. And as we're looking at that other places, a lot of money, that's scary. So I just worry that some of these things are like scary and maybe not like actually ever going to hit this. Like, what is the possibility?
We know for a fact that we will
Okay.
need a new roof within.
So then I
roughly
guess
10 years.
my opinion is like, if that's there, like,
Yeah, I finished.
okay, then it should be on the capital planning, like where it is on our capital budget. Is it gonna hit in 10 years?
See,
Is it gonna be 15?
that's the
but-
difference between somebody who looks at things one way and somebody who looks at things from a different perspective. From my perspective, that building, you know, just because it's capital doesn't mean it isn't associated with that building and the costs of operating that building. Yeah.
Roofs are, I mean, roofs are replaced. Roofs are replaced on every building at some point. I don't know that this is a unique cost to the recreation.
No, it's not, but it's not a cost we think about in terms of what it actually costs to operate a building, because we never think about the term depreciation. And if we did think about it, whereas anybody who's in the private sector who's in the private real estate business, depreciation is a real thing. And it's part of your P&L, it's part of your income statement. It's part of you know what you think about when you're operating. It's part of how you allocate capital. It's not something we do.
But then I guess
Oh, wait, okay, hold on,
Wait.
hold on, Kristen.
Yeah.
We have to have one person at a time talking,
I
so.
think my
Yeah.
point is like, what I'd like to see is us to act like that and have like, what does that schedule look like? And how do we plan this out? Because having it in this nebulous in the future is scary, right? Versus like, hey, the last time we did repairs on this roof was here. Realistically, we're probably looking at it in 5 years. This is an estimate of what it could cost. Because I feel like that gives us what we need to know as to like what we're actually looking at for runway here. And if we need to make a decision now or later.
So
And I just like, the 15 million invested in this building, was it 15?
No.
500,000.
500,000,
CPC has invested.
CPC has put, well, now you got to back out the playground. 'Cause that was part
Okay,
of that.
but like, and
So-
like part of that is like, okay, but it wasn't like, wasn't the, I mean, we're not putting it in the budget and the tax base that we've hit this building, right? We're lucky that we have CPC or that we're able to fund a playground differently, but
72 cents out of every dollar that we spend out of the CPC.
right, and then we get
comes
a
out of
nice match.
No, it comes out of the property tax.
Yes.
So
I know.
there's, our match is down to 38%.
Yep.
So, we need to treat this as though this is money raised
Yeah.
from taxpayers saying. So, again, I'm not trying to tear this building down. I'd like to see it
No, and that's
preserved.
fine. And I think that the information you're collecting is valuable, but what I'd like to see is like the source of this and plotted, so we just understand this. And because I think that people hear some of this and then I hear it repeated around town and they're just misinformed, right? So I'd love for this information to be in one spot and like ratify that this is the actual number and this is the actual timeline we're looking at.
Okay, Kristen, do you have something to add before I have Al speak again, and then I'm gonna go to Grant?
No, I agree with everything Jen said. I just think we have to make commitment among, first of all, I think we do, most of us appreciate a P&L and what depreciation is. I think it's just the way it's characterized for this building when it's a fact for all of our buildings. Some of the work needed, of course not, but a roof, yes. So I just think if we could make an agreement amongst all of us that if we're going to be in a meeting, a public forum and talk about numbers, then there should be materials that reflect those numbers and what they actually represent, as Jen said.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, Grant, and then Al, that you
Thanks.
have to question, because Al was giving us information, so.
Grant Barrington, Historical Commission, for those who don't know me. I just wanted to say that from a preservation, well, first of all, I'm not personally convinced that the costs of the building warrant destruction. And from a preservation perspective, there are options outside of town ownership of the building that can result in the preservation of the building. So obviously, if the town owns it and wants to keep it as it is, the town could put a PR on it right now to preserve it. And I think one element of this kind of discussion of whether or not it should be demolished, introduce fear into the community that the building could be gone. And I think, personally, I would like to see a PR on it, regardless of what happens to the building, whether or not it changes from town ownership or not. I would like to see it preserved and protected. But if for whatever reason the town decides that the costs are too much, or that it doesn't have the right use, or move somewhere else, if the building was to be sold, it can also be preserved through a preservation restriction, so that the next user would also be bound by that. And that's a deed restriction that goes in perpetuity. So essentially, regardless of whether or not the town keeps it, or whether or not they dispose of it through a community development corporation and turn it into affordable housing or whatever, either way, it can be preserved through in perpetuity through a preservation restriction. So that's something that I personally would like to see to preserve the building and make sure it doesn't get lost.
Is that something historic would do, is a
Yeah,
preservation
can I throw in,
restriction?
because I have something that I think kind of bridges and hopefully helps a number of comments and things that people have said. I would note that as I previously said, I regard it as a really stellar first step in the Shopsy subcommittee report. And because several of the authors, well, one of the authors that just left briefly, but several of the authors are with us. As you well know, then there's a footnote where it says, notably, the subcommittee was not granted an expense budget, which that puts the hands behind your back. And you didn't have money, and it says, and I thought this is a very good, well said footnote that as the subcommittee's charge is to do a more general assessment of the potential for reuse the site for affordable housing, a formal feasibility study, much deeper investigation into granular development details, site conditions, budgeting, profitability analysis, et cetera, is beyond the scope of this report, but would become relevant in the future if and when a decision is made to redevelop the site. And I thought, bravo, and correct. And What we need, of course, to move this forward, and I know this has been, I've been on a select board, is a right proper feasibility study. Right? This is how we are all going to move forward with this, is that we're going to have to, with all respect to the unbelievable intelligence and talent in the room, when I'm trotting around trying to find examples throughout the state of successful adaptive reuse examples of school buildings, I feel a little bit like a dog, bringing back bones and seeing what will please, but a feasibility study needs to be done. Money for that is needed. And that's where you come back to the Massachusetts Preservation Project Fund grant round. In 2024, there's going to be $1 million available. We can apply for up to $30,000 for the feasibility study we so desperately need. The one catch goes back to Mr. Farrington's comment, because you got to put a PR on the building to get that money.
Can I jump
This
in on that
particular thing.
for the feasibility study?
Yeah.
It depends on the amount of money you get, the length of the restriction. It is not a perpetual preservation restriction. It is timed in a manner of years to reflect the investment the state has made in it. It's when you use that feasibility study, if you want the full-fledged funding for restoration, and that's up to 100,000, but typically around 50,000 for most projects. That is a perpetual restriction, but the feasibility study is a matter of years. And I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10. I don't even think it goes up to 10
and
years.
I mentioned all this because I think obviously, and I've got an axe to grind over here at historical, that it seems to me it would be a step forward, a first step in what's going to be a very long and complicated process with obviously a lot of difference of opinion, but a first step that would certainly please me would be to place a preservation restriction on the building, saying, look, one thing we know is that we're not going to take this down. And again, I would remind you that in the very brief list I gave you, some of the schools that have been gone through this process, some of these properties, as I said, the one in Southbridge sat vacant for 8 years. The one in Sharon sat vacant for 25 years and yet came back to life. And so again, the only place where I'm just absolutely rooted in the ground is that demolition is forever. And so we really got to go careful. And I would like to send a message out to the community, if there were consensus, that the one thing we're sure about is that we got to be sure, and again, like that subcommittee, you guys did a great job on that, but your hands were a little bit tied because you didn't have the money, to do, you talked about a full feasibility study. And I simply agree that, and I read that and I thought, well, that was a very honest, forthright kind of statement. We did a great job, but we were still limited.
Yeah, and just to chime in on that, it really wasn't a function. My point was this: don't view this as a feasibility study. We're not engineers. We're not architects.
Right.
We're just a bunch of Joes from Southborough with lay people who are doing their best to research that.
And I say the next step, in my view,
I agree. The next
is a
step.
full feasibility study. That costs money. I've got one option for you.
So let me chime in on that, because there are other options too for feasibility. There are other funding sources for feasibility studies as well. Just so you know, there are multiple, sources for.
Yeah, this is just
but I agree, should
bringing
be done.
my bone
Yeah,
to, the historical bone at the table kind of thing.
Doug,
So Doug Mann, Shop C Committee, been on about a year, so I'm not an old face. I like being called a new face. That's good. But not all of us have been here, on committees for 30 years, but been in South for over 20 years. I live on the south side of town, so I know this site very well. I've been in the playground. We've been in the building, right? With respect, there's usage of the playground, but it's great still, but it's not necessarily overwhelmed, right? I'm just being honest, right? Because I live in that part of the neighborhood. But I will say the great thing about it is that you can use it during school hours. That's a very unique aspect because, Ben, you cannot, right? So can't underscore that. It's like the phase school field, so it's really important. I'm in the real estate development business. I will tell you this, you cannot replicate these buildings, right? This would be a major loss if you let this building go. Now, what the use is and who should pay for, that's a whole different story. You also don't want to let it go into inactive use, right? Because that actually makes it worse. The cost to bring back a building that's been out of service for 1, 2, 5, or 25 years, it just increases the cost, right? So affordable housing developers are out there. They develop stuff all the time. It does not take 10 years to develop an affordable housing building. This is also an affordable housing building or option. It is not public housing, right? This is for people earning 70, 80% of median income. That's surpassing $100,000 nowadays. We have a housing crisis, right? Just generally, right? Whether this is the right site for it or not, it's a whole different story. I'm not sure there's a single employee in the town of Southborough that can afford to buy a home now in the town of Southborough. That's a stark fact for us, right? So I just think that's just to put it in perspective, but these are people that are earning probably $70,000, $80,000 per year, right? So that's something just for us to think about, you know? And so that's what this committee is about, and trying to find opportunities for that. And that may be also done other ways, diversity of housing types, whether it's townhomes or apartments or places for, I mean, I'd love to give my kids my home, but because they certainly can't afford it, right? So how do we do that, right? Where do I go if I want to stay in town? So, I mean, we all know that's not new, right? That's not a new thing. So, but so I think the next best step is a committee, which is great, right? I think it sends really the wrong message that Shopsy is not on that committee for the town. Doesn't look good for the town, right? What is it signaling type of thing, right? So I feel a little awkward about that conversation, honestly, out loud. But that's one member, right? And planning, I definitely agree too. I mean, they're the most familiar with the process too. So, and you guys started with that, right? So I would advocate that the committee goes back to, you know, to that. But I will say the town should be really careful that it doesn't miss the opportunity to preserve the building in some way, shape, or form. There's also, the governor's just announced a new housing bond bill. There's an amazing amount of new resources and capital is going to be out there. I'm not saying we're not trying to rush the project, take advantage of it, but just there is a lot of opportunity out there. So, and it should be with the community too, because again, I live on the south side of town, but people are going to have a lot of the pains of what that is. But it would be a shame for the building to disappear through inaction. And you know, and it's a beautiful building, right? I will say preservation restrictions are great. I would just caution, you know, the pursuit of perfection that prohibits it from being reused is dangerous too, as well, right? You know, so the idea is the building should be preserved, but not necessarily to the point where it's so onerous that the building can't be reused, right? So that's why I'd be careful, because we did in different towns where you got to make it perfect and put it right back the way it was. That was from 1920. Well, that's very expensive too, right? Type of thing. So it's got to be preserved, but reasonable, I think, in some ways. But so, I mean, I'm excited about this, you know, going forward. I'm excited to see what the committee wants to do with it and looking forward to the process. But I just wanted to add those comments without necessarily echoing everything else that everyone said. So I think there is a solution, as Tom said, to meet everyone, make it work.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, Al.
So I think that doing a feasibility study is putting the cart before the horse, because it's feasibility for what? A feasibility study where, you know, can we turn this into affordable housing is different than a feasibility study for, can we make a community center? Or can we make a senior center or something else? And that's the purpose of this committee, and is to envision what the future of this building is. At that point, then we start spending money on feasibilities. Feasibility studies are expensive. I will remind you that the feasibility study that we're committing on Neary is in excess of $900,000. So I think what we need to do first is say, this is our vision for what the future of this building is. Now, it may be that we don't need to spend any money, because what it is, and this is that, you know, we're going to sell the building for some other use. I would recommend that if we want to put a historic CR on it, that we wait until we have a vision and an idea about what we do with that building. And at that point, we try to tailor it so that we don't preclude some modest changes to the building, which otherwise, you know, benefits the community. So I think it's a package deal. We don't want to put the CR on before we have and we don't want to do feasibility study, if we even have to, until we have a vision of what it is we're going to do with the building. To answer your question about who declares it to be surplus, well, it's kind of, if we don't have municipal departments will always want municipal departments to expand to fill the space allotted. It's like a gas. This is just a bureaucratic fact of life. But if we have a new home for youth and family services, and we have a new home for the rec department at some point in the future that makes more sense for both of them and is more functional, then we have a building that we need to give some serious consideration to answer your question about the future and the list. You know, I can give you the list right now of the things I worry about. And, you know, there are things like the heating system and the roof. Now, I think they're both in reasonable sort of 5 to 10 year shape. But, you know, then the next thing I start worrying about is what's in the ground. The good news is that the oil tanks were removed and they got a clean bill of health. There may be other things in the ground that we don't know about yet. And there may be things wrapped around the pipes that we don't know about yet. So there's a lot of things that have to be done, but I think first we need, and those are all potential expenses that, you know, I worry about because they're budget busters. So first we have to have a vision of what we're going to do with the building, assuming that it becomes surplus to the current vision of what our municipal needs are. And at that point, we either do feasibility studies or we make CRs that are consistent with that future use.
Oh, thank you, Al. Jen?
I have a question. So we formed this committee, assuming everyone's on it, that we want on it. We're not supposed to do a feasibility study. We're supposed to come up with ideas of what we think we want to do with it. But then, I mean, like, so we're waiting for 1.5 years to figure out what happens with NERI. And that domino effect impacts whether or not a school comes offline, whether or not this community center, and whether or not we vacate this building. I'm just worried, like, someone who's on a small committee who has a seat on like 4 other committees, like we've got the same people across multiple committees. And I'm actually on the community center building committee, right? We're glad we're part of the conversation, but I feel like we're doing feasibility studies on buildings and having conversations and investing time for something that's going to sit on the shelf for like 2 years. And I just worry that we're going to come back and do it again. So like, I get that we want this committee or we want to figure out what to do with it, but is now the right time to spin up another committee that's going to hit all of us to do something that really isn't binding at all, and then come back in like 2 or 3 years when like this building now becomes available to use? Or like, I don't know.
I think
We keep spinning up committees in this town, and I worry that we don't actually finish what we start. And knowing that we're all putting a lot of time into multiple different committees right now, like, I want to make sure that if we spin up another one, it's going to actually do something and have an impact, and it's like worth us being on, right? Versus
have
I
to start
don't want,
somewhere.
I know, but is right now the right time, or do we really want a commitment in like a year from now when there's some idea of what's going on with NERI, which will kind of be a domino effect of a lot of these buildings?
That would
Or
be a question for the selectmen because they're creating the ad hoc committee. So
I know, but I feel like we can put input into it too, right? Or like, I guess, I don't know, or us sitting in the room, like, so I mean, how many of us are gonna be the ones on this committee yet again? And
they
like,
want new faces. They don't want ours.
I know, but like, but so for example, so like rec seat, like rec, we've got someone on CPC, we've got someone on the committee for the new community center. And like, we've got an open seat, I think, sitting on open space or something like that, that we haven't even filled because we don't have people that can join all these other committees. So I want to make sure if this is formed, there's actually a reason to have this, and there's something we can achieve that's not going to sit on the shelf and gather dust and have to be redone again in another couple of years.
Okay. Kristen, do you want to speak? Kristen, I saw your hand go up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I was just listening to what Jen was saying and really like, thinking about that. I don't have a fully formed thought, but the 2 things I'd say is that there's other intersecting topics that are more front and center, specifically the use of CPC funding for affordable housing and the Affordable Housing Trust. So there's a kind of a cross section, right, in terms of what we're talking about for 21 Highland and potentially that funding. So I think there's something there about, trying to figure out the path ahead and maybe the feasibility for affordable housing versus other projects. And then my only other thought, Jen, is that I think we were talking about a couple-year time frame before we would know, I think that's what Al said, correct me if I'm wrong, before we would have an idea, to your point, of what's happened with the schools. But I think it'd be better at that point in time to have something to dust off to move quickly versus waiting to form the committee and then having that for another year. So I totally hear what you're saying. I'm trying to put the time frames in my head together. But those were my initial thoughts.
But like, what are we dusting off something that's now aged and like, has the landscape changed for affordable housing and like things like that? Just wondering
Yeah.
what we're investing in now versus then.
Yeah, and
That's
maybe I'm naive because I'm thinking about it kind of like when we did the facility study for rec, right? Like we used that for several years. Obviously, when it came time for a project, Tim had to go back out, refresh the estimates, et cetera. But we had a lot of that groundwork already done.
So if I could go to that timing, sorry, if I could just jump in really quickly, Freddie. That's my concern from an affordable housing standpoint, because right now, as Doug just mentioned, this is a sweet spot right now. Right now, state legislative policy priorities, housing. There's funds out there for housing. Affordable housing, this is the time to strike on affordable housing. And I'm concerned that if we dither around for another 3 years, put together more subcommittees and people debate different things, and then we ultimately come out and hopefully come out the way I want it to come out, which is this is going to be affordable housing. We're going to be 4 years down the road, and this opportunity that's present right now is going to be passed.
So then but then I feel like the charge of this next committee should be like, is this what we go do now, or do we not want to do that? And we wait and see what happens? Because
But that's not what they're creating the ad hoc committee.
I
for.
know, but I guess like, that's why I'm saying like, but if that's not what we want, then I think we need to give feedback.
That's what I thought you said was
No,
from
no,
municipal use.
no. If the building becomes surplus
Right.
to our existing municipal uses.
Okay.
What are we gonna do with the building?
So, right, so but that committee is talking about what's gonna happen in a couple of years then, right?
So I
And so
can see
that's
the
why I
committee
feel like that's
as
a
a way
waste of.
for look, easy for me to say here, I'm not on the select board, but at some point, the select board needs to pull the trigger and have some political
There's no question about it.
backbone and just make a decision to do it,
Well, so when this select board met in June to set out a set of priorities. One of the priorities we said is we want to figure out what we're going to do with 21 Highland. So, yes, I think we're prepared to bite the bullet, but we got to know which bullet to bite.
Not the exploding one.
Well, I've done that plenty.
Freddie.
So benefit of being all on the same table, big table, is hearing lots of opinions. And I've got new information. I've changed my position on some things, not the open space things, several times as I've heard different people's input. And it's invaluable. But one thing I'm hearing right now, and first it was Al's talk and then what Jen said is, how do you do it? So don't do a feasibility study because we don't know what we're going to end up using the building for. But how do you decide how to use the building if you don't know the constraints of doing a certain use versus another use? You ran into that a little bit with the housing, right? That you need a feasibility study. If you decide what it's going to be and then do that feasibility study for that use, that makes sense. But if you don't know the condition of the building and it's being applicable for different uses, then how do you decide which one it is and make their own decision? And you don't know that the cost to make that happen, if the town were to keep it, or if the town was to try to do something else or sell it or what, that would have different consequences. And I think Jen made a lot of sense. This is let's have a timeline. This is all dependent on, unless we're going to go out and rent office space to put recreation and youth and family services, which is going to probably cost annually more or as much as maintaining it. You're gonna rent the office space and the building's empty. We're not gonna dispose of it till the school situations decide. And her point about being on too many other committees and representatives, it does get challenging, even if you want new faces. Believe me, we try to get new faces. It's not always easy. It's not like we haven't been out there campaigning. If it's something that's, then you're gonna work on it. And then you're done and you have a great product, but then it's not relevant anymore because we don't know what we're doing. So what's the actual timeline for when the school's going to be decided? And recreation and youth and family might conceivably be moving out. And then how much for, work backwards? How soon before that do you need to have this committee? And I think one of the benefits of the getting the designation, the federal designation on that building, that's why the CPC was very interested in doing that, because if any of this work hits the criteria, which is very specific for that grant, but for restoration, you get the state match and you get this PR, because PRs aren't always that inexpensive. If you want a good one, they can cost $100,000 to purchase a preservation restriction. There's other ones, it depends on how well you want it protected. You can't protect it yourself if you own the building, because the historical commission could hold a PR, but not on land or a building that the town owns. It's not preserving everything. That's the other thing. How are you going to use the building for the restriction? Like, you don't have to do the interior, and you don't restore it back to its original use, because it's not redoing, it's what's here now. You're preserving what's here now, not what it was originally there. So like all of those things come into play. Getting the state funding would be great. The first step is to get some of the state funding to protect the building, which would alleviate some of people's concerns. Even if it's short term, we're not tearing it down. I'm just saying, I'm agreeing with Jen, like, why have the committee now if we're not going to do anything by the time the committee's decision's made, it might not matter.
Okay, Donald Dumont, do you want to unmute yourself and speak? I'm sorry.
Sure, sorry, Don Dumont on the Recreation Commission, one of the old faces, I guess now. It's been like 5 years. I just had two questions. I wanted to clarify or get a clarification. The committee that's going to be formed that was talked about earlier was I thought I heard that they would come up with ideas or recommendations if the building was determined to be surplus space for the town. Is that, number one, is that true? Number two, if that is true, how is the space to be determined? How is a space in town determined to be surplus space? Because that seems to me to be the bigger question in my mind, given today, as we've heard, it's maxed out, used up to the point where, and I wasn't aware anyone had been pushed out previously. It may have been even before I was around, but to the point where there's not even enough space for people who were there before. So could we just get some clarification on, the whole surplus space and how that works into this determination?
Can you answer that question?
Sure.
Please.
This building is nominally the responsibility of the select board. It's not nominally, it is the responsibility of the select board to operate the building. And so the question, as you know, we're dealing with a system with a lot of moving parts. And if you're a mathematician, this is a set of simultaneous equations, and it's hopefully going to converge at some point. We don't know yet exactly how it's going to settle out, but what we would like to do is have a plan. So if, for example, we have a school building which can be converted to municipal use, I think it would be perfectly rational to move the Recreation Commission into a school building where there's a gym. That makes a lot of sense to me. And we can find another home for the youth and family services. At that point, we have a building which is nominally empty. That sounds to me like it's surplus to the existing uses. So it's really a question of, how the housing situation shakes out. If that doesn't happen, it may be that we want to build a community center and would look at a different set of things, but the community center might easily also be a home for a rec department. In fact, it'd make a lot of sense. So I think
So
at some point.
Thank you for that clarifies it for me. So thank you for that. My takeaway is that it's not imminent that this building will be declared to be surplus space.
No.
Because you've identified that, and I think rightly so, if a school with a gymnasium appeared, I think, it provided the space worked out as far as making sure we had everything lined up. That would be fantastic from a recreation department perspective. So, but it doesn't, at least timeline wise, it doesn't feel like that's certainly not imminent. And in sort of the ebb and flow of town government, nothing really happens super fast. So that's helpful from that perspective. I don't know, Tom, how that works with sort of the cash is on the table now concept for housing, because this might be a 2 or 3 year sort of horizon.
Yeah, that's what concerns me, Don, because even if we were to start today under affordable housing, it's a long process. You've got to go to town meeting to just put a plan together. There's an RFP process to get people interested. We would have to do a feasibility study. Plans would have to be developed. They'd have to be vetted. They'd have to go to town meeting. Even if we started today, everyone decided today, hey, we're going to convert 21 Highland to housing. It's going to be 4 years before, 3 years before shovel hits the ground, 4 or 5 years before there's actually a product there. So my concern is if we wait another 2 years or 3 years before even pulling the trigger, we're 7 or 8 or 9 years away from anything actually happening there on affordable housing. That's a long time period for governor's priorities to shift to another topic.
Brian, can I throw out, we're trying to struggle to find a way forward, right? And how to do it expeditiously. One of the schools I was looking at, the Coffin School in Marblehead. This was a school built in 1942. And the way they're going about it is that they had what's described here as a visioning for Coffin School reuse, a community visioning something. And this was prepared for the town of Marblehead by the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. Southborough's in that. We're in the, the Metro West Regional Collaborative sort of subdivision of that. And this was something that funding for this study is a 20-page study. They did a lot of community input. They took, the surveys and all that stuff. And it was paid for by Mass Housing and the town of Marblehead because it was directed toward housing. And I think, and go back to Freddie's comment, and I agree with it. I think in a way, there's a little bit of a problem with saying, take a lot of time and think, this is what we want. We want X, Y, Z, this kind of housing in this place, and then spend money in a feasibility study. And then the feasibility study comes back and reveals that it's not feasible. I would like to have some professional input to show the range of what is possible in a building like that. And, personally, for instance, and this may kind of rub against your interest, that I'm all for affordable housing in that parcel. Although if it's going to involve a serious compromise of the site integrity, because I am a big fan of the open space component, I would rather see, for instance, market rate condos in that building than a site that was degraded by 3 or 4 ancillary buildings having to be built to make it financial. And I know that doesn't go with your thing, and but I'd rather, this is why we're talking, I'd rather save the building at any cost. So I'm kind of caught between, your two positions. But the point of this is that I think the community input is really important, what the town wants, how the town envisions it. I've heard some proposal. I heard the fanciful proposal. What I believe was it Mr. Palmer that proposed a pool at one point, and I listened and I went, wow, okay, that was like a whiff of smelling salts. It just woke me up and made me think a little bit. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. I don't know.
Not.
But I think we have to have, okay, it's not, but we have to have, all respect to the Palmer, but we have to have an open-minded, broad discussion, not to go on endlessly, because I agree that there's you can miss a window, right? But to Freddie's point, I don't want to also say, this is what we want. Spend money on a feasibility that comes back and indicates that it's not feasible, and then say, well, then let's tear it down. Because, maybe affordable housing is the best option, maybe senior affordable, because you know how a lot of those conversions seem to emphasize senior affordable housing, but I think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, because they tend to be smaller units. And so you get.
I've heard that too. It's particularly school buildings.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
I've been told that they're uniquely situated for senior housing.
Right, yeah,
Because
most
they're
of the-
wide hallways and
Yeah.
smaller units.
Yeah,
and
most of the ones that I was looking at
retrofitting.
went senior, and the explanation was they were just, school buildings were well suited to that use. That would be great, but also if a study, some kind of preliminary professional study came back and said, this size, this siting, it just ain't gonna work. Maybe we need to consider an art center, a co-working space, something that none of us has yet thought of. And so I'm trying to be open-minded. I see these towns doing visioning studies, other kinds of studies, but I think the community input is really important. And that's it.
I also think that we can't be short-sighted, because we have two 40B projects that have gone to the three 40B projects. We've got Park Central. We may not have any surplus, anything, and have to be building more stuff, because we may end up with enough kids to blow out the 1,600 and whatever. I mean, we need to take a look at all this stuff. And I think if we're not considering those 40B projects, we're being very, very short-sighted. And the MBTA communities where you have to have 15 units per acre and this. I think we really need to start having some very serious conversations about future use, where this town is going, where we want this town to go, and stop like the guessing game and forming this and that and not really making any serious decisions, because we're going to get ourselves in some very serious trouble, and the budgets the tax rate is going to go through the roof. I mean, there's talk about raising this and doing this and doing this. We can't afford a community center and a new school and increase CPA funds. We can't afford it. I mean, I don't know what everybody else is doing in taxes, but the tax rates are going through the roof. We're going to price all of ourselves out of here, and all the new faces, they won't be able to afford to be living here either. And our seniors are leaving because they can't afford to live here. So we need affordable housing. I don't care if it's senior housing, I don't care what it is, but we have to take a hard look at where this town is going and how we're pricing people out. And we want this and this and this and this. I think we need to start reusing buildings and repurposing things and being smarter with what we're doing. And, we can create all the committees in the world, but we need to make some decisions here. We can't make a committee and in 2 years expect them to come back with an answer when we are desperately need for affordable housing. We desperately need more stuff for recreation. We desperately need to protect our open space. We desperately need to appreciate and respect the historic properties we have. It's almost like we don't have a master plan because we're not paying attention and just listening to everybody. It's like, I think this is fabulous. And I'm so grateful that you guys are all here and we're having this very open conversation and being, we're listening to each other and we're hearing each other. But I'm just seeing more and more issues as we're all talking because we're all together. It's like, whoa, yeah, this. And now I'm like, okay, now I see this. Like, we're not looking at this. We're not looking at this. We're not looking. So I think we need to have another conversation. I think we need to do this again, and we need to bring in like youth and family services, and we need to bring in planning, and we need to really sit down and talk together as a community, as a family, to really hear each other and try to come up with some solutions rather than, no, nothing against the selectmen, but you guys can't make all these decisions on your own. You really need to be with us like you are here tonight, Al, and you're hearing all of this. You guys are gonna have so much more on your plate than you ever anticipated, because if you can hear these people, right, you hear what they're saying to you. And unfortunately, you're the only select person here. And it's like, did you fill your notebook tonight? Because I've got massive notes here, so.
I think Sam is here. Sam's here. To give him credit.
Yeah,
Sam is
so-
here.
Oh, that's right, Sam's in the audience.
And
Sam's
then
at everything.
with a hand.
Wait a minute, I do have a
He's
hand
at the
up, hold
train
on.
station every Saturday.
Andrew Bath, hold on, Andrew, let me pull you in. I'm gonna promote you to panelist.
While you're doing that, I also just, for the record, recreation is in session, since we're three of us here, we have quorum.
Oh,
For the
you
record,
called you into
recreation.
Hey,
session.
everybody, can you hear me okay?
Hey, Andrew, thank you. Yep, you're good. You have the floor.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, I've been listening for a little while on YouTube, but I figured I'd give you my 2 cents. So,
Uh-oh.
you know,
What's it gonna
as one
cost
of the original members of 21 Highland, I mean, the subcommittee, this came about because there's a significant amount of capital coming in the near term for South Union, right? I think it was $400,000 or $500,000 to do a few projects. And you know, I think that's kind of what spearheaded this. Of if we're not going to use this building long term, maybe we don't do those capital projects. But and I've been listening about a lot of the future uses. But my suggestion is to dial it back and focus currently on the as is of the property. I think having a property condition assessment done with somebody to come in and look at, do an inspection, understand where are we at with the life of the HVAC equipment and all the property, how many years left do we have on the roof? What is an actual assessment of cost? You know, the parking lot, the playground, kind of really understanding where is that property at, we're looking for, you know, with an actual professional's assessment. And then also, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, parceling out the property, maybe putting in some affordable housing elsewhere. I brought this up when I was on the committee that we should be doing perk testing to see if that's even a possibility. I believe the current septic system could handle, I believe, a 3-bedroom South Union, and we're talking about 6 or so. So I think just kind of setting the table stakes on what is this property at today, what cost is it going to have in its current state, no matter what, and what could be done just based upon the topography, soil conditions, etc. So we know what, you know, where kind of the boundaries are in terms of what this property could actually do, before we get into, you know, what everybody thinking outside the box could use the property for. You know, I think that would give us something to do in the meantime, help level set expectations and work forward from there.
So are you suggesting a feasibility study now, Andrew?
No,
To
not
find out
a
what the use-
feasibility, just a
Not a
property,
full feasibility property, okay.
just a property
And-
condition assessment, right? We do them on a
how-
lot of buildings in town. But also taking a look at just from an engineering perspective, what does the property allow, from a percolation or from you know, if you were going to parcel it out into different lots, what would you be able to do from an engineering perspective? Because, you know, the property might not perk for anything more than 3 bedrooms anywhere, right? And that certainly dials back the ability from a you know, affordable housing perspective or using it for anything more than what it currently is.
Andrew, do you know who would do a study like that? I mean, that's not something like John Parent could do. That would be something that we'd have to
That's
hire
John
an
Parent.
engineering group.
Yeah, so John will hire a professional and we do it. And John's done it for the capital plan and he's knowledgeable, but I think having an independent contractor come in, and we did that on the schools, we do it on all the buildings, but having a engineering firm come in and do it, it's like a home inspection. Somebody comes in and looks at everything, and then they basically say this is close to its useful life and you might have to replace it in 5 years, and this is the approximate cost. You know, we've done them before.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
problem.
Al, that's
gonna-
your ballpark.
Yeah, I've already started that
I'm
process.
giving you homework.
I've already started that process with John. And,
Okay.
you know, I think that actually is a productive idea. I'm going to suggest that we wrap up only because I got an 8 o'clock Zoom call. I got to be on to vote for something.
Okay, Freddie just has, go ahead.
Yeah, quick one. Just back to, and I think that was a great point that was just made about assessment, but back to the housing situation that, and this is a personal opinion, and having sat on the CPC and also being aware of what's been done in this town and what's coming down the road. Everything, all the affordable units, I'm using quotation marks with my fingers, are at the 80%. We're not building anything less, we just don't. The town has a real need for lower than that. And I'll just say this, at South Union School, I don't see the finances fitting to put in something much lower unless, another thought is, sometimes they have these things called, it's like co-housing. It's almost like a rooming house with shared kitchen and living rooms, and it's often for elderly people, but it's, not a rooming house per se, but you don't need necessarily, some people, a full apartment. It's more of an efficiency type situation where you could maybe get more units in there, but then you run into the septic system. But I'm saying, really what I'm saying is we need to be really looking at less than, what do we have for real affordability in the town? The senior center? We don't even have Section 8 vouchers because we don't have apartments. There is nothing in this town for anyone who's not at 80%. And I saw one affordable unit in Marlboro, and the 80% for a single person was something like $90,000 a year income for one person, right? That, from many people's viewpoint, is not affordable housing, right? It's more affordable, but with all these 40Bs, the existing ones we've invested CPA money 1 unit at a time. It doesn't really solve the problem. That could be done if you really work with a community builder and come up with a plan for something with like 30, 40 units at affordable rates. And they do it at like 30%, mixed rates. My understanding is they'll do a whole development where it's mixed rate and from low to higher, and it's all affordable. It's not 10% or 25%. And they manage it.
Chime in on that, because this project that we put into the report, that's used with low income housing tax credit. So the requirements of that program are that a certain number have to be at 50%. And there is a range under that program by requirement. And if you had a group like Metro West Collaborative developing through that project or another CDC, that's their whole life, is trying to create affordable housing for people at different income levels. It wouldn't be just 88%.
And I'm only bringing that up because
Yeah.
my understanding is that doesn't fit into the footprint of the existing building.
No, not building.
Not 30 years, but
Yeah.
to use rest of the 3-acre site, I think there are.
I mean, yes, we had a piece of property that I've done research on,
I'm
and
well
I've
aware.
talked to my board about it, and we do have a lot that we were.
So anyhow, I'm just throwing that out there when you have those sorts of considerations, because personally, I don't think the town should be investing any of its funding on 80% median income. I think it's we can have 10% of the up to 750 units. They're not going to be built right away, but I'll tell you one thing about zoning. You zone for what you want to happen, even if the state's making you do it. Eventually, those units will get built, right? And only 10% of them can be affordable. There'll be a different kind of housing at that level of density. But of those 10%, they're going to be 80%, right? You're not going to get, none of that is going to create a diversity of income levels. Diversity of housing, yes. I'll just stop there, because I know it's late, but I'm just saying, there's lots of concerns over what the town really needs and wants for community housing, affordable housing, and not putting all your money into one project where you could get more somewhere else.
Thank you, Freddie. All right, does anybody else have anything to add to tonight's meeting? Again, we're in.
So you said
we're thinking about scheduling another roundtable discussion in the future. Is that correct?
I think that's it. I thought this was a pretty good thing to do tonight and really get a lot of different perspectives and people's ideas. I think this is a great thing to continue. But I would also like to add, so Youth and Family Services is also in the recreation. I think they would be a nice add to bring them in next and planning. And I mean, stakeholders of at least that property there. And I know they're gonna create the ad hoc committee and then maybe we could get together with them as well. Hang on, Kristen. So I just think this is, I don't know how everybody else feels. I mean, I'm just grateful everybody came tonight and this was just such an open and honest discussion and everybody was respectful and I think this was a great first step, I thought. So Kristen, you have something to say?
Just two things that as kind of next steps that also stuck out to me that people said was one, we do need to figure, like, we need to start putting down what are all those decisions and considerations to your point, Dorianne, because so much came out tonight. So we need to capture those and then to the point made by someone, I forget who, apply those, there's a sequence, right? And then a timeline for when we expect to make those decisions. I think there's a lot of value in how we put that to paper. It's the beginning of a plan. It's a plan to get to a plan.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. All right, we're gonna need each of the boards to adjourn their meeting. So Shopsy, I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, this is a roll call vote. Al?
Yes.
Okay, Doug?
Yes. Yes.
Tom? John?
Absolutely.
And Dorianne is a yes. We are adjourned. Okay, historic? Thank you, guys.
I make the motion to adjourn the historical commission meeting.
Second.
Motion made by Grant and seconded by Annie. Roll call vote. Annie?
Yes.
Grant?
Yes.
Jim?
Aye.
Michelle?
Yes.
And Dan Blanchard?
Absolutely.
Miller's and I. 6-0.
CPC doesn't need to do a vote, open space, nor recreation.
No, I
So
do.
Thank you, everybody, for
I
coming
do.
tonight.
I do technically.
Oh, you do?
Quorum. So I'll make a motion to adjourn recreation.
Second,
All right, roll call vote. Hanson, yes.
Well, yeah.
Dumont, yes.
Yep, got it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody,
everybody.
for
Thanks,
coming
Dorian.
tonight.
Thank you, Doris.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dorian.